Ahoy there, Captain Benzie here, coming at you with another video from inside the EVE Echoes final test. Today I wanted to talk to you about the Blood Raider Covenant faction frigate, the Cruor, which allows me to discuss various things like the Energy Neutraliser and the Energy Nosferatu, as this is a very unusual ship that does some interesting stuff that we're going to have a look at today. So if you're interested in Energy Neutralisers and Nosferatus, this is a great little ship to have a look at. Otherwise, let's just jump right into talking about yet another really cool faction frigate, and you guys know how much I love my faction frigates. Anyway, before we jump in, if you do enjoy this video, let me know at the end of it by hitting a like on it, and do consider subscribing to the channel for all things EVE Echoes, making sure to ding that notification bell so that you know when the next video goes live. Now, if you've got a particular question you want me to answer, a topic you'd like me to cover, a ship you'd like me to look at, that kind of thing, let me know in the comment section down below. Come and find me on social media, and come join the Catskull Cartel Discord. There are public channels there to talk about all things EVE Echoes, and we're more than happy to help out in any way that we can if you've got any questions. Now, talking about helping out, if you do want to go the extra mile to help support this channel, you can do so by coming and joining me on Patreon. Every single pledge, every single dollar really does help. It's always humbling to know that you guys are willing to help support this channel with your own hard-earned money. Really helps keep me going, helps keep this content coming, so really, thank you all ever so much. Cool, that said and done, let's talk about the Cruor. Now, the Blood Raiders are a rather unique bunch of guys. You can find them down in Amarr space, in a little bit more of the central Amarr kind of areas, but you will obviously need to look for the dead space anomalies to find the particular parts that you'll need to get the blueprints for something like a Cruor. Looking at its stats, though, you can see that this is very much like any of the other faction frigates: 3 high slots, 3 mids, 3 lows, and 3 of each of the rigs. It then has a roll bonus of 100% reduction to Energy Nosferatu overload penalty, which we'll come to later when we talk about Energy Nosferatus. That just means there is no overload penalty whatsoever, and we'll discuss what that means in a moment. For every skill point you have in Advanced Electronic Warfare, you will get an additional 15% Energy Nosferatu efficiency, 15% Energy Neutraliser strength, and a 20% increase to Stasis Webifier optimal range. Now, that Stasis Webifier optimal range is slightly a confusing and almost pointless stat in and of itself. The Energy Nosferatu efficiency and Neutraliser strength, notice that doesn't increase the range of either of those, and those are both incredibly short-ranged modules. Ultimately, you're going to want to be sitting at around the 5-kilometer mark in order to get the most out of both of those, which means if you're sitting at 5 kilometers, who cares that your Stasis Webifier suddenly has a range of, say, 11-12 kilometers? You're going to be sitting at the 5-kilometer mark anyway. Finally then, Advanced Frigate Command will also give you an additional 20% small beam laser damage, obviously up to a total of 100%, and an increase of 7.5% per level for small beam laser tracking speed. Very useful, just because, as I said, you're probably going to be sitting at about the 5-kilometer mark. You do want turrets that can track very, very quickly. Otherwise, its flight velocity is a little bit lower than some of the other ships of this size, but it's got a very good warp speed. It's still not terrible. Small cargo hold. Power grid's okay for what it needs to do. Capacitor, again, is okay, but then again, since you've probably got a Nosferatu on here, that's not going to matter too much. So let's talk about that Nosferatu and that Neutraliser. So an Energy Nosferatu essentially is often referred to as a vampire because it sucks the energy out of the target. Ultimately, you hit the enemy ship with this thing and it drains their capacitor, refilling yours. And remember I said it was short range? You can see their optimal range is 4 kilometers. At 6 kilometers, it is dropped down to 50% efficiency, and at 8 kilometers, it's useless. So you want to be sitting at that 4 to 5 kilometer point there. It's insanely short range, and the aim of this ultimately is to get rid of as much of their capacitor as possible whilst filling up yours. Now, if we jump back to the stats here, 100% reduction to Energy Nosferatu overload penalty. Basically, an Energy Nosferatu drains at the rate you see on the right here. So if we go back, the energy transfer amount is 32 gigajoules, which is once every 4 seconds. That means 32 gigajoules if I'm at 4 kilometers at the 100% effectiveness range. Every 4 seconds, 32 gigajoules comes out of their capacitor and into mine. So that does drain it fairly quickly, especially on other frigates, which do have a fairly small capacitor of their own. And it will help keep your own capacitor going. Obviously useful when you've got energy turrets firing that sap your own capacitor. Now, ultimately, that's only if your capacitor is not at 100%. If your capacitors are at 100%, then the energy Nosferatu starts to overload, and it is no longer capable of effectively draining from the enemy's ship. Or that's usually the case. Again, with the Cruor there, with its roll bonus, there is no overload penalty for a Nosferatu. Even if you are sitting at 100% capacitor, you are still going to be drawing 32 gigajoules here with a Mark III small energy Nosferatu, obviously more with a larger one. You are still going to be drawing 100% of what the Nosferatu can draw. Now, the second bit I want to talk about then is the energy neutralizer. These are similar to Nosferatus in that they're all about negatively affecting your opponent's capacitor, but they don't fit yours. You can see the optimal range is the same, 4 kilometers and 2 kilometers, so 4 kilometers for 100%, 6 for 50, and 8 for 0. This activates once every 6 seconds, and it does cost to activate. So that the fact that the Nosferatu is going to be draining some of their capacitor and refilling ours is useful because it does cost to activate the energy neutralizer, 27.3 gigajoules every 6 seconds. But every 6 seconds, it also drops their capacitor by a whopping 60 gigajoules. So here you've got 60 gigajoules every 6 seconds coming out of that, and every 4 seconds... Oh, crikey, every 4 seconds the Nosferatu is taking out 32 gigajoules. That's a fair amount of their capacitor getting whacked. You're not here necessarily worrying about damaging their ship, you are pulling their capacitor apart. You are draining their power, which will stop most of their weapons, obviously things like energy turrets and railguns that have an activation cost will stop activating. If they're using a Webifier or a warp disruptor, or things like shield boosters, afterburners, anything that drains capacitor at all, you can take their capacitor all the way down to 0% and get those things switched off. That's the aim of the game here. Finally though, I have got a Mark V Stasis Webifier on here. Again, flight velocity adjustment drops by 51%. Ultimately, that means if they're moving normally at, say, 300 kilometers per second, 300 meters per second, they're going to drop down to 100, just under 150 meters per second, which makes them a lot easier to track, which, considering how close you are going to be to the enemy, just means that you can be shooting that little bit better. Now, due to the bonuses that this particular ship gets to small beam laser damage, that means, of course, I have put in 3 Imperial Navy small beam lasers. Surprised? Yeah, not at all, really. Optimal range there is 12.1, so you're going to be within the optimal range at any opportunity. The tracking speed of 212 is not really fast enough for a 5-kilometer range. That's where the web comes in. The web slows them down so that those turrets are suddenly tracking properly, and you'll see that in effect later on. I have got a bit of combat set up to showcase all this in effect. Now, as for the low slots ultimately come down to a couple of different things. Now, if you look at this particular ship's defense, you'll see it's got 1162 on shield, but 1938 on armor. Traditionally, this is an armor tank, so I have put a Federation Navy 100mm reinforced steel plate on here. That means if I do start to hit the armor, if the shield's about to go out and the armor's going to take a hit, I can whack that on. It will increase my armor by 284. Massively whack that up, plus the additional 284 for the activation. It's got 284 flat, sorry, 284 additional for the activation. Does mean that as I'm about to start taking armor damage, I can whack that on and it will hit the reinforced steel plate instead. As my shields start to boost themselves back up and repair, hopefully my shields are back active by the time this runs off. Then by the time this has its reactivation delay drop down, hopefully I'm only just about to come back out of shields and into armor again, and you can keep actively tanking armor like that. Because I need to be up close and personal, you can go for a micro warp drive here. In fact, a micro warp drive is probably the better option. I just couldn't get my greasy little mitts on a small one for cheap enough to demonstrate, so I'm using my Republic Fleet small afterburner. I've got plenty of these kicking around. Very, very useful things for that extra flight velocity adjustment of 157%. Obviously, would be better to have the micro warp drive, but if you don't have one, you make do. An afterburner will still get the job done nicely. You're still going to be whizzing around at a fast enough speed that you are not an easy target for whatever it is you happen to be ruining. Finally then, because we're using energy turrets, I have just put a Mark V heatsink. I'd love to have a higher tech version of these, but I just don't have any. I've not spent much time in a Mars space, so I haven't really picked up any, but this just simply ups the damage of any of the laser turrets you've got equipped, gives you a flat damage increase, plus an additional increase when you activate. That means this ship is currently sitting at 171.91, so 172 DPS, which is not to be sniffed at, especially since you're going to be in a situation where they can't really do much back. They're not going to have any energy to fire at you. You're going to be whizzing around so close that they're not able to track you. It's about surviving and death by 1,000 cuts sort of thing. Very similar to the succubus. Capacitor is again stable on this, which is really, really useful even before that Nosferatu comes on and just keeps you right at the top, which again is why that 100% Nosferatu overload is on there. Now obviously in regards to skills, the most important ones are going to be the ones that give you the bonuses, which immediately, I do this all the time, I've come off and completely forgotten, that is Advanced Electronic Warfare and Advanced Frigate Command. Of course it's Advanced Frigate Command, it's always Advanced Frigate Command, which again you want anyway because it just gives you extra velocity and inertia modifier with your frigates. It just means you move better, and if you're going into faction frigates, every single one of the faction frigates does have a bonus for Advanced Frigate Command. The other one, again, was under electronics, under electronic systems, electronic warfare. Advanced electronic warfare is the one that gives you the bonuses there. I haven't got into this, I've only just picked up the Cruor, and as you can see, I'm training up other skills at the moment, ready for tomorrow's big skill boost injection. Ready to showcase some really cool stuff in a video there, but ultimately what these do is reduce the Stasis Webifier capacitor need and Warp Disruptor capacitor need. Ultimately, it's only the Stasis Webifier that we're really getting the bonus there for, so you're ultimately training into that just to get the ship bonuses. Now armor here, again, armor operation or armor hardening is going to be useful for the extra survivability, as is frigate defense and advanced frigate defense upgrade. These just increase the shield, armor and structure of any of your frigates that you happen to be flying. Of course, because we want to get up close and personal quickly, we are going to be getting up to literally a 5-kilometer range, having Afterburner or micro warp drive operation, depending on which of the two modules you want to equip. Having those up to level 5 is useful for Afterburner. It reduces the amount of capacitor that requires, it makes it activate faster so that you get the bigger boosts, and the velocity bonus is larger for the Afterburner. A micro warp drive is very similar kind of thing. Bigger boost for the warp drive, it's faster activation time, slower activation time, increased activation time, so you go from 4 seconds to 6 seconds or whatever. Just means you're using capacitor less, and it reduces the need for capacitor. Very useful for ships like this that want to get up close and personal. Finally, of course, this is a laser ship, so having skills in small laser operation, whether that's just the small laser operation for the damage and the tracking speed, or the small laser upgrade, which gives you damage, accuracy, and optimal range, the upgrade's not as important here. I would go mainly for the small laser, and then into advanced small laser to get that heatsink activation time, but that's just me. Ultimately, again, the Cruor is not so much about doing hefty amounts of damage at an incredible speed, it is about locking them down and ruining their capacitor. Anyway, all that said and done, it's all very well and good me talking about this. Let's actually undock and showcase the Cruor in action, because this is a really unique ship, it's a lot of fun to use, and every fleet ultimately wants at least one of these. So if you can be that guy, you can start charging for your services if necessary. Anyway, let's undock and have a look. So, Toast, one of the Catskill Cartel crew, has very kindly offered to help demonstrate this by coming out here in a Thrasher Guardian ship and using the shield field module so that you can see when the Neutraliser and the Nosferatu both take effect. Now, as we've already discussed, these two things have very, very short range, so I do need to get inside the shield, up close and personal, to a range of about 5 kilometers in order to really make the most of this. Now that I'm here inside the shield and orbiting, I'm going to activate that Nosferatu and the Neutraliser. Hopefully we're going to go into the orbit here, and you'll start to see how much this really drains it. That shield should go off once he hits 0 capacitor. I'm also going to web him just to slow him down and make it that little bit easier. So let's go now to observe on him. Let's zoom out a little bit so that we can see that shield and see if it'll disappear. Now, this might take some time, hopefully that's going down nice and quickly for him, but you'll see that that shield should drop at an alarming rate thanks to that Neutraliser and the Nosferatu going through. Now, of course, the bonus there as well is that the Nosferatu, despite the fact that I am at pretty much full capacitor, the Nosferatu gets no negatives whatsoever to the fact that my capacitor is full. Normally, if you're draining with a full Nosferatu, it stops draining as effectively. Here, because I'm in the Cruor, it gets that 100% reduction to that overload penalty. So fingers crossed, we should be getting a drop in the shield of the Thrasher Guardian soon. In fact, I'm just going to ask him how his cap is doing. How's your capacitor doing? Because hopefully that should be going down very close towards the empty mark, and then we can blow him up. Which, of course, is always good fun, although I haven't told him I'm going to do that bit yet, so we'll have to see. Anyway, so let's reset camera, just so we can have a look at how cool the Cruor looks whilst it's going around. So far, you can see the ship's field is still up at the moment. There it goes, I think. Was that it there? Is that the shield field gone? No, it is still in position, but it's on 0% capacitor there, so the shield doesn't drop on the 0 capacitor. That is fueled purely by fuel. Okay, I didn't know that, and I just learnt something new there. So now the Thrasher Guardian, as Toast points out here, is sitting on 0% capacitor. Perfect time for me now to open fire with my guns and see how much damage this thing can do. Oh, crikey, that was a lot stronger than I thought. There we are. Apparently it can be sustained regardless due to cap recharge. Yes, it does appear that shield field modules do rely solely on the fuel. Anyway, let's not blow him up just yet. Let's take off the shots there, and we'll reset camera back to the Cruor. So you can see the main reason for this, as I said, is to get inside, start neutralizing some of those other modules. For example, if it's a burst frigate or something like that, then yes, 100% you're going to be able to deal with things like the remote shield boosters, that kind of thing, very, very quickly. I'm going to take this guy right down to as low as we can get without actually destroying it, just to showcase kind of the damage that this thing can do without rigs, and just with sort of fairly basic setup there, based mainly around the tackling and the neutralizer. As you can see, this thing does actually pack a fair amount of punch, and so for fleet operations isn't necessarily a bad idea at all. And he's going to be really struggling to warp away anyway, simply because at this point he's got no capacitor, so can't actually really activate his warp, which is going to be fairly scary. Anyway, that just about wraps up everything that I want to say about the Cruor. This is one of her, I love how this ship looks. I think it's a really useful ship, especially in fleet operations. Almost every corporation that is doing some kind of fleet operation has at least one Cruor parked in someone's garage, purposefully for getting in and neutralizing anything that you do really just need to want to get neutralized as quickly as possible. Anyway, I learned something new today in regards to the fact that the shield field module is purely on the fuel and not on capacitor, but we've demonstrated anyway how this all works. I hope this has inspired you to try neutralizing, to maybe fit an Energy Nosferatu and a Neutraliser onto some of your other ships, and maybe to give the Cruor a go, because certainly if, like me, you're a frigate pilot, this is one of the most useful frigates out there. It's not a traditional combat frigate like, say, the Dramiel or the Worm or the Succubus. It's not as good at tackling as, say, an interceptor, but what it does do is shut down some vital components of the enemy fleet, and allows you to do that. Anyway, folks, thank you ever so much for watching. Thank you to Toast for spending the time coming out here to help me demonstrate this. Demonstration didn't quite go as planned, but we had a lot of fun regardless. Anyway, folks, again, thank you for watching, happy sailing, and see you all in New Eden!